Hey, welcome back to the Build Beyond podcast. I'm your host, Chris Netley. As always, this podcast exists to challenge and guide you so that you can reach your full potential. And I want to talk about full potential today. How do we, I say we as healthcare providers, how do we actually help someone reach their full potential in a rehab setting? I think this is an interesting question because here's an observation. This is an observation with just from me, let's say as a patient. A lot of rehab environments are very easy, very sanitary. And I don't mean that they're clean. I mean, they are clean, but sanitary in the way that their life is dirty, life is messy, sports, the environment when you step outside of a rehab environment, when you go back to sport, or you're just living your day-to-day life, it's not set up for success. There are challenges that you can't predict. And in that regard, I'm saying it's not sanitary because you can't. It's not just like the nice, neat, clean, cookie cutter, carpeted, air conditioned, padded table type environment, which is what we typically see in rehab. So I think what ends up happening is people go to rehab. Rehab usually starts off really well, and then it stops. And what people want to do is up here. So there's this gap between where rehab stops and where treatment stops, and then where people actually either need to compete or where they want to live. Because a lot of times people aren't maybe competitive athletes, but they live active lifestyles, or they have jobs or just things that go on in their everyday life that require certain capabilities. And I think a lot of times healthcare falls short on helping people reach their full potential. So I want to talk today about failure. I studied engineering for my first 2 years of college. I wasn't great at it. Funny thing is, I always thought I was good at math until I got to college and started studying engineering. And I was one of maybe a handful of kids who actually had to go to my calculus classes because I wasn't as good at math as I thought I was. I obviously didn't end up becoming an engineer. But I feel like I still kind of think that way to a certain extent. And I was listening to a podcast episode recently with an engineer who had worked for NASA and done a variety of things. And he said something that really resonated with me. And I think it's actually in a large part the way I approach rehab. When you're an engineer and when you're building something, you're going to fail. Failure is inevitable. You just want to fail and learn from the failures, and you want to fail enough times so you can learn enough lessons so that you can kind of keep improving the invention. A good example, and I actually used this on a previous episode, is this example is the movie The Incredibles. If you haven't seen it, you're missing out. The first Incredibles movie, when the main bad guy, the supervillain, he creates this, this robot that's designed to kill superheroes. So he starts testing it. And what he does is he puts it on this island and he goes out and recruits superheroes, and he makes up some story that this thing went rogue. But essentially he wants to watch the battle and he wants to see where the weaknesses are for the robot. So eventually he gets to Mr. Incredible. Mr. Incredible is the only one to actually go out there and destroy the robot. And then based on that, the guy has to go back and he makes it even better. So even Mr. Incredible can't defeat it. And there's a pivotal part where Mr. Incredible finds the files, the computer files, and he starts to see that the matchups, this superhero fought it and this is what it looked like. And then after the battle, this is how it was changed. And then the next superhero came in. So basically, this supervillain, who was an engineer, was just going through and inviting failure because he knew he was going to have to fail a certain number of times to get that robot exactly how he wanted it. And that's what this engineer on this podcast was talking about. It's working for NASA. It was like, no, we were trying to fail as much as we could, because once we launch something into space, we have to have a really high confidence that this thing is going to succeed, because we can't just pop out there and fix it when it breaks. And I think that's a really interesting concept, because a lot of times when people go to see a healthcare provider, they are not showing up for failure. They're showing up for success. And any road bumps early on may seem like, oh, this isn't a good environment for me. So maybe you go to a healthcare provider and you're going there, let's say for rehab specifically, and it's not going the way you had hoped early on. You aren't seeing the progress that you wanted early on. And that can be really discouraging. And I think it could be a sign that you're in the wrong spot, but it could be a sign you're in the right spot, because it depends on how that healthcare provider is approaching rehab. So I try and set it up for my patient to let them know, hey, failure is a very realistic option. We really have 3 options. We're based on everything we have available and your goals and where you are now and the exam and all of these things. We are going to make a hypothesis, and we're going to move forward with a very specific plan, and we're going to be systematic about it, and we're going to test it. So you're going to go out and you're going to do your rehab for a week or 2, and you're going to come back. We'll stay in touch between visits, but we need data points. So you're going to have to kind of go through this, and you've got basically 3 things that could happen. When I see you the next time, either you got better, which is option 1, which is awesome. Option 2 is there was no change, and option 3 is you got worse. Those are our only 3 options. And we can make educated and very specific decisions based on the outcomes that we get. So if you get better, we're going in the right direction, more of that. We may even push it a little bit harder to see what happens if we change one variable. So maybe we add some volume, or we add some intensity, or we add some range of motion, whatever it is. We're probably going to make it a little bit more challenging. If you don't get better, but you don't get worse, so nothing changes, maybe we haven't run the experiment long enough. Maybe we need to tweak one thing. We can kind of make that decision together. But it doesn't necessarily mean we're on the wrong track. It might just mean that we need to keep going in that direction with some slight modifications. And if you get worse, which is the 3rd option, we got to make a change. Obviously, this isn't designed to make you worse. So we can make a huge pivot. And that would be like, in the Incredibles, when Mr. Incredible defeats the impossible robot, and then the supervillain has to go back, but he makes the best version of it after that defeat, because he learned from it. He didn't get discouraged. He learned from it. And I think that's a good way to approach rehab. That's how I approach rehab, because if rehab needs to start off light and easy, so we're stretching, we're trying to make you feel a little bit better, trying to calm things down a little bit, very quickly as things start to calm down, we have got to start to build you back up. And we've got to start to challenge you. And inevitably there's going to be discomfort, and hurt doesn't always equal harm. And I've got to make sure that you know that, and we know what's too much, but what's not enough. Because you can't reach your full potential if I'm too conservative and pulling you back and I'm not challenging you. But in order to reach your full potential, we actually have to, at some point, flirt with failure. And we have to realize that there are setbacks that are inevitably going to happen. And honestly, sometimes we can't get to the outcome that you want, to that long-term goal, without failures. It's just it's just how it is. We try and mitigate that, because failures in a rehab environment usually mean pain, and we don't want that. But I would argue that at some point, if we're really trying to help you reach your full potential, whatever that is, and we're not pushing you to a point where you could possibly fail, Are we pushing you enough? I think it depends on the goal. Sometimes for certain people, I won't go there because some people don't have lofty goals. But even for people who don't have, even for people who aren't trying to return to sport or trying to be, go run a marathon or whatever it is, if they're just trying to get through your day, what happens when your day presents something crazy? You know what I mean? It's like, you don't want to move quickly. What happens when someone's backing out and they don't see you in the parking lot of the grocery store and you got to have some agility? And maybe you're going to take part of that hit, but then you're going to have to balance and move quickly. What happens if you slip on some ice and you've got to move quickly? What happens if you have to bend over with a flex spine and pick something up that's heavy? What happens when you have to change a tire in the snow? There's just a lot of stuff out there. So I would argue that even for the people who they don't have lofty goals, they're not necessarily competitive athletes or trying to do something crazy could find you. And so I feel like as a healthcare provider and a rehab professional, I at least got to bring up that topic and talk about it and offer that as an option in the rehab environment to make things less sanitary. And again, I don't mean not clean my table or wash my hands. By those sanitary, I'm talking about preparing you for the unknown and the unknowable when you go outside of the rehab environment. Because here's the hard truth. When we're in a rehab environment, we can control everything. I have complete control. I can control the surface. I can control your footwear. I can control the temperature, the lighting, the sound. I can control the exercises, the range of motion, the rest time, the loads, the different types of resistance. We can pause. I can explain things. We can do coaching. We can repeat if something doesn't go well. We can monitor your heart rate and your stress levels, and you can eat. We can stretch. I can do soft tissue therapy. You name it, we can do it in the rehab environment. We have complete control. As soon as you walk out that door, I have no control, and you have very limited control. So in that regard, leaving the rehab environment is less predictable. So I would argue that if we're not addressing that and trying to prepare you for that, how are we helping you reach your full potential? I don't know. I don't see how we can do that. And so that means within the rehab environment, as quickly as possible, within reason and safety, we've got to start making things challenging. And if we're going to prepare for the unknown and the unknowable and the unsanitary stuff that can happen out in the real world when you walk outside, rehab's got to get challenging. It doesn't have to get dangerous, but we've got to push you a little bit. And again, that's really relative to what you want and what you're ready for. But in my experience, even the people who have the most mundane and normal goals, just returning to life, and the people who those people still need something more. And I think that's where a lot of rehab falls short, because I feel like there's interesting stereotypes. So from a strength and conditioning perspective, and I think a stereotype of strength and conditioning coaches are just like big jack dudes with beards and tattoos who turn the music up really loud and push people really hard. And then the stereotype, which is not true. I mean, I guess it is in some cases, but for the most part, that's not true. And then the stereotype for rehab is like, carpeted floors and polo shirts and stretchy bands, and you're very careful and it's very easy. And that's not always true, although it can be. So even those two stereotypes are stereotypes, they're not necessarily true. They're in the ballpark. The stereotypes exist for a reason. So I think maybe what I'm trying to do, or what I would recommend that you look for, is someone who is in the middle. You don't want this super easy rehab experience. you don't want to be pushed hard like an X Games athlete, unless you are an X Games athlete. But you want you need something that's doable but challenging and progressive. And something that's at least going to get you up to that level of what you are going to face in sport or in everyday life. And you might not get it at your first rehab place, because in some places, you will go into a rehab environment and the people there are great. Well, now they know a lot, but they work there. They can't control the clinic. Maybe the clinic's owned by a hospital, and the heaviest thing they have are 10-pound dumbbells. How are you really going to really rehab someone with that? I don't know. And I think a lot of people who work in those environments, if you talk to them behind the scenes, it's still the same thing. Like, they're limited. They have the skills and the knowledge, and they would like to, but they're just limited by their environment. And it's not even necessarily the clinic owner's fault. There's just things get set up a certain way, and they get set up for different reasons. And it is what it is at some point. So if that's where you're doing rehab, or that's where you start, that's fine. You're probably going to get some really good quality care, but you're going to need more after that. And if you can find a spot where you can just start off, that you can stay there, that's going to be able to progress you all the way through, it might even be better for you. I don't know. I'm not here to tell you what to do or what's better for you, what's not better for you. I'm just giving you this. I love this concept of actually flirting with failure and realizing that you might be a certain number of failures away from finding the solution or getting what you want. And wouldn't that be interesting? Wouldn't that be interesting if you had a crystal ball and you could say, look, for this problem that you're dealing with, in order to figure it out, you are going to have to fail 10 times. So you're going to have to come up with a plan, execute that plan at a high enough volume and not really move in the direction you want to go, and then change that plan. And you're going to have to do that 10 times. That's kind of depressing. I've never had, that's a lot. That's a lot of failure for rehab. But what if that was you? Well, you might sit there and think, okay, well, I want to fail systematically 10 times as quickly as possible so that I can get on the right path. If that's what it takes, let's do that. And I think from my experience, failure, we're really talking like you get things wrong once, maybe twice, maybe 3 times, depending on how long you're working on something or how complex it is. Because sometimes there's multiple variables. Someone might have a knee injury, but they're also diabetic and have heart disease, and they've got other things going on. So, you got to kind of take a lot of that into account and realize that you can't necessarily push as hard as you want to, because people are different. So, and you got to respect the differences and how unique each individual is. But that's the point of this episode. I think rehab should be hard. I think you should flirt with failure within reason. I think it needs to be safe, but there's at some point, unless the patient doesn't want it, we got to at least provide it as an option and let them know that, hey, when you step out this door, we can't control anything. Do you want to prepare for some of those crazy things that can happen out there? And honestly, I bring it up to every patient, and I have never had anyone turn it down. Of course, that's what they want. Who wouldn't want to be prepared when something hard happens? And to be honest, that's where the fun is. The boring rehab's the stuff in the beginning. It makes you feel good, whatever. But I think you start to get some of that more challenging stuff. It just turns into strength and conditioning for the most part. But it's fun. Take a bunch of people especially people who aren't competitive athletes. Maybe someone's never even been in a competitive sport where they've been in a weight room, where they've had a coach pushing them. Wow. What an experience to have for the first time, to treat someone like an athlete, to get that kind of care and to have that kind of enthusiasm, that for anyone who's listening to this, who's been in that environment, you've been on a team or an individual sport, but maybe you had a really good strength and conditioning coach. You had a really cool strength and conditioning environment. It's pretty fun, and it's definitely motivating. You get pumped up and you see the progress, and you're tracking things, and then you're seeing how it's improving your sport or whatever it is that you're trying to do. So you see the translation, outside of the weight room. That's pretty cool. So I don't know. That's my take on rehab, at least where I am with it right now. I think we should flirt with failure a little bit more. We should probably push people harder. It's hard, but that's what we get paid for, and that's why I like doing it. It makes it entertaining for me. I've never injured anyone in a rehab environment, thankfully, because I think people are a lot more robust. You get them in the right, it's got to be progressive. I'm not going to throw someone into plyometrics when we haven't prepped them, when I will never send someone into an environment where I am not extremely confident that they're not going to get injured. But I want that environment to be really challenging. So there is a progression to all of these things. And so if you're ready, you're ready. Mentally, physically, the tissue's ready. It's time, and when it's time, you got to go. You can't hold people back because you can't reach your full potential if you're being held back and you're not being challenged. You have to be challenged. If you're challenged, there's always a possibility of failure. If you do fail, you learn from it, you move on, you get better. And inevitably, you may be X number of failures away from what you want. And if that's the case, like an engineer, fail systematically, learn from your mistakes, change, get better. It works. The process works. It's fun. I hope this podcast episode was helpful. And if you have any questions, let me know. Thanks for listening. I will catch you guys later.